Now, speaking of data, we haven't really talked about what's happening in the UK.
Oh, yeah. What's going on over there?
Well, the Chartered Banker Institute and Personnel today both suggest that there's a bit of a disconnect between what financial sector bosses want and what's actually happening.
So even though a lot of UK finance leaders are pushing for more office time, it seems like the progress towards a 5-day week is pretty slow.
Yeah, and KPMG actually surveyed 150 industry leaders, and nearly half of them said they were considering things like swipe systems to track attendance.
Wow. That seems a bit extreme.
It does kind of speak to a certain level of mistrust, doesn't it?
It does.
Mm.
And here's where the gap between leadership and employees becomes really clear, because those same KPMG survey respondents, even while wanting more office time, admitted that flexible working could help their companies be more competitive.
It's like they recognize the benefits, but they can't quite shake those old school habits.
And this tension isn't unique to finance either. Personnel. Today mentioned that Amazon boots Disney nationwide. They've all reversed their flexible policies recently and mandated a full-time office return.
So there's definitely a broader trend here towards more control.
It'll be interesting to see how this plays out in the long term.
But even within this push for more office presence, there are some nuances. Like the Financial Times reported that Deutsche Bank updated their policy. Managing directors now have to be in 4 days a week.
But they're encouraging a more even spread throughout the week, so not everyone is crammed in on Tuesdays and Wednesdays.
Right. It's like they're trying to find that sweet spot, enough face time to keep the higher-ups happy, but with enough flexibility so that people don't quit.
It just goes to show that there's no one-size-fits-all solution.
Exactly.
Right.
What works for a trading floor might not work for a back office team.
And that's where shifting the focus from just attendance to actual outcomes becomes really crucial.
Right. Professor Bloom is a big advocate for that more nuanced approach.
It's about coordinating team schedules to maximize collaboration.
Not just mandating a fixed number of days.
And that's where good leadership is so important.
Absolutely. It's about setting clear expectations, fostering trust, creating a culture where people feel valued regardless of where they're working.
But beyond company culture, there's this whole other layer to consider.
The impact on cities and real estate.
Right. We talked about New York and Miami being the frontrunners in return to office rates.
But Bloomberg had this fascinating report about how Wall Street is specifically driving an office revival on Park Avenue.
Park Avenue.
Ah.
So we're talking prime real estate here.
Exactly. And it's leading to some pretty impressive gains for a certain real estate investment trust, SL Green Realty.
They own a lot of the office space in that corridor.
Right, so it's a microcosm of the larger trend, but with even higher stakes.
Bloomberg highlighted how this is creating a divide within the city. Vacancy rates on Park Avenue are now below 10%. But for Manhattan overall, they're at 24%.
Which is more than double what they were before the pandemic.
It really shows how this return to office push is playing out so unevenly.
And it's not just about location, it's also about the type of building.
Companies are really prioritizing high-quality buildings.
Especially in finance.
So it's not enough to just have an office. It has to be the right office.
Exactly. And this is putting pressure on landlords to up their game.
They're trying to compete with the comforts of home.
But on a grander, more corporate scale.
Okay, so we've got this geographic disparity. But what about the different industries within finance? Are they all on the same page about this back to the office push?
Well, Forbes had an interesting article about this, and they made a good point. It's not just about banks and brokerage firms.
Oh, right. The regulatory landscape plays a role too.
Exactly. For example, in the U.S., there's been some debate about whether the SEC might soon require financial advisors to work from designated office locations.
And how would that impact the industry?
Well, if that were to happen, it could have a domino effect.
You think other firms would follow suit?
It's possible,
Yeah.
even if they weren't initially planning to have stricter in-office policies.
The one regulation could potentially trigger a whole wave of change.
Yeah. And Forbes also pointed out that there's an element of competition here.
Competition? How so?
Well, some firms believe that having a strong in-office presence gives them a competitive edge.
Like it makes them look more stable and reliable.
Right. And they argue that it leads to better collaboration and stronger client relationships.
So it's not just about productivity, it's about perception too.
Exactly. And that perception is really important in an industry like finance.
Where trust and reputation are everything.
Right. It adds another layer of complexity to this whole discussion.
Definitely. Yeah, it's like they're trying to hold on to that old image of stability, even as the world of work is changing all around them.
And it's not just about appearances. I think they genuinely believe that it gives them an advantage.
But whether that's actually true in the long run, Who knows?
It really does feel like we're in the middle of this giant experiment right now,
Trying to figure out what the new normal is supposed to look like.
and the rules are being written as we go.
Now, so as we wrap up today's deep dive, it's clear that there's no easy answer to this return to office question.
It's about weighing priorities, understanding the trade-offs, and finding solutions that work for both the companies and their employees.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that brings us back to you and that big decision you're facing.
As you're navigating all of this, think about what's really important to you.
What are you willing to compromise on?
Mhm.
And what are your absolute non-negotiables?
Don't be afraid to ask questions. Advocate for what you need and explore different options.
This information is meant to empower you, not to overwhelm you.
The future of work is being shaped right now, and it's up to all of us to participate in that conversation.
It's not just about accepting what's handed to us. It's about actively creating the kind of work environment we want to be a part of.
So as you head back to your own workplace, whether it's a bustling office or a quiet home setup, keep this in mind. The conversation is far from over.
This push and pull between flexibility and control, it's going to continue to play out.
And the choices we make, both individually and collectively, will determine what the future of work looks like for all of us.
We've covered a lot of ground today, from global trends to local real estate dynamics, CEO pronouncements to employee pushback.
But ultimately, it comes down to this. What do you want your work life to look like?
What are you willing to fight for?
And on that note, we'll leave you with one final thought. We've talked a lot about the tension between companies and their employees. But what about the role of government in all of this?
No, that's a good question.
Should there be policies in place to protect workers' rights to flexibility? Or should companies have the freedom to set their own policies?
It's a tough question with no easy answers.
But as the future of work continues to unfold, it's a question we'll all need to grapple with.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, and good luck navigating your own path forward.